Well, I have to say that Pete was quite right. And I'm so glad he told you Rocky's story, because as he mentioned, that Rocky's wife did indeed run off with a bootmaker. Now, I know that that sounds terrible, but her and Rocky never really did get on. And she got on so much better with the bootmaker. She was still young and, well, she divorced Rocky. Her and the bootmaker got married and they lived a long and happy life together. But Pete was also right in saying that there was a plague. And whilst some people did get rid of it from the cattle, unfortunately, it made that leap into human beings and that plague spread across the land. And before the bootmaker and his wife knew what had happened, well, there was a national lockdown. All the shops were closed. And the poor bootmaker, well, he could not make a penny. His little shop was closed. And time went on, and just when he thought, well, it's coming up to Christmas, this is when I can make my money, another lockdown happened. And he was left in that very tricky situation. All he had left was one piece of leather. And he looked at it mournfully, and he knew that it would only make one pair of shoes. And so he looked to his wife and he said, wife, I am going to make these the best pair of shoes I can. I'm going to make these so fantastic that they might bring us in enough money that we can scrape together and at least afford a little bit of Christmas pudding, something to just pass the day. And so he sat by his workbench and he took down his stencils and he carefully drew out and he cut out the leather. But by the time he'd finished, he was an old man and his eyes were sore and his back was aching and his fingers were sore. And he thought, if I do it now, I'm going to rush the job. I'm going to make a mess of it. So I'm going to leave it till tomorrow morning. I'll leave it just there and I'll get up first thing. I'll do it. And then I will put those shoes in my shop window. And hopefully, if I'm allowed to open my store under tier 2, somebody might come along and buy them. And so off he went up to bed. He snuggled in next to his wife, and there he slept a restless night. But when he woke up in the morning, he came downstairs and he looked on the workbench, and there were a pair of shoes, the most fabulous pair of shoes he'd ever seen in his life. It was definitely the leather he cut out, but the stitches were so tiny and so prim, so delicate. He couldn't believe it. He couldn't have done a better job himself, and he'd been at this job an incredibly long time. And he called, wife, wife, quick, come and have a look at this. And she came rushing in and she went, oh, husband, you've done a nice, neat job on that. And blimey, you were quick. You must have been up since the larks. No, wife, it wasn't me. I left these all scattered around last night in just pieces, and now here they are, proper solid shoes. Well, maybe you did it in your sleep, dear. I mean, you have been doing this job an awful long time, and I tell you what, you do half do some strange things in your sleep. I wouldn't put it past you. No, he said, no, I'm pretty sure I didn't, but we'll leave that for another time. I'll get these in the window, and hopefully somebody will come in and buy them. And sure enough, the moment he put those in the window, the bell on his door went, and a man came striding in, and he said, those shoes will be just perfect. Here, have 2 gold coins. Oh, said the shoemaker. He said, I was just thinking they might be a silver penny. Oh, no, for shoes of this standard, definitely 2 gold coins. There you go, sir. Wrap them up, and off I'll go. And so shoemaker wrapped them up, handed in the shoes, and off he went. Well, were those 2 gold coins? That bootmaker looked at them and went, do you know what? I could definitely get myself some more leather with that. So off he quickly ran down to go and get some more leather, and he came back, and now he had enough leather for 2 pairs of shoes, or maybe a pair of shoes and a pair of boots. And so he set about cutting out, and he spent all afternoon and all evening cutting out. But by the time evening came, his eyes were drooping, his back was aching, his fingers were sore. And so he thought, I'll leave them for the morning. But You're probably up to speed with me by that point, because in the morning he got up and there was the finest pair of shoes and the finest pair of boots. They were absolutely outstanding. He put them in a window and sure enough, a man and a woman came in, and well, she looked quite sad. She was complaining about how their wedding had been cancelled yet again. But they looked at these shoes and they said, you know what? We're actually quite glad our wedding was cancelled, because if our wedding hadn't have been cancelled, we wouldn't have been able to walk down the aisle in those shoes and those shoes and those boots. They are just exactly what we want for our wedding. And so they bought them, not just for the price that the shoemaker had thought he might sell them for, but for double the price. And so off went the happy couple, and the happy bootmaker was delighted. He went off, he brought enough leather for 4 pairs of shoes. And so this went on for a few days, up until the winter solstice. And on the morning of the winter solstice, his wife looked at him and said, not that I mind that we're getting all of this wonderful help and these shoes are selling like hotcakes, but darling, don't you get a bit concerned that somebody seems to be sneaking in the middle of the night? You know, as much help as there being, it is still breaking and entering, and well, with this plague going around, you don't know what they're carrying. Maybe we should find out who it is. Yes, yes, said the shoemaker. Wise idea, I do agree. And so, on solstice night, there they laid out the leather. They hid themselves behind some barrels and sacking in the workshop, and they peeked up, looking around. And they waited, and they waited, and the candle burnt low, and the clock struck 12, and at that point, oh, with yawns and aches, suddenly they heard it, a slight rustling. They looked around, and there, on the skirting board, a small little hole, a mouse hole that the bootmaker had been meaning to patch up for some time. But suddenly, out of that hole shot 2 tiny, naked figures, and they ran across the floor. They climbed their way up the table. They ran across the table, and when they saw the bits of leather, they looked delighted. They turned to each other. Oh ha! Mamma ya! Oh ya! Oh ye! Oh And as soon as they finished the shoes, they disappeared. They ran across the table, down the table leg, and out through the hole. Well, the bootmaker turned to his wife and said, my dear, we've got elves. And she looked at her husband and she went, really? I thought you had a bit of a wobbly lip and a shaky leg. Not Elvis, my dear, elves! Elves! We've got elves! Well, that's rather marvellous. But did you see them? Not a stitch of clothing, not a rhinestone in sight. I mean, they were absolutely naked. And at this time of year, they'll catch their death of cold. We should do something for them. You're right, wife. They've helped us out over these last few days. We should definitely do something to help them. And so the next morning, after they'd put all the shoes and boots in the window and they'd all sold out by lunchtime, well, the shoemaker and his wife, well, they sat down to their work. The wife got her tiniest knitting needles. In fact, they were just pins. And with a little bit of cotton, she started knitting the tiniest little hats and the tiniest little gloves and the tiniest little scarves. And that bootmaker, well, he started to make the tiniest sets of fine leather boots. There was a shirt made and a leather jerkin and fine breeches. And by Christmas Eve, they had done the most wonderful set of small little clothes, 2 sets for the elves. And they were so excited. They were far more excited about this than anything else about Christmas. They decided that that night they would leave no leather on the table. Instead, they would just leave the clothes and the boots. And there, They had a late supper. They nestled themselves down behind the barrels and the sacks, and they waited and they watched. And when the bells struck 12 on Christmas Eve, the most magical time of the year. Some say it's midnight on Halloween, but any child knows that it's actually midnight on Christmas Eve. Well, then those two little elves, they came running across the floor. They came running up the table leg, across the table, and they looked around. Voilà. And they started doing a catwalk in front of each other, showing off their fine clothes. And once they had shown off their clothes, they looked around, for then they realized that somebody had seen them. And they ran across the table, down the table leg, and out through that little mouse hole. And that was the last time that the bootmaker and his wife ever saw those teeny tiny little elves. But you know what? They weren't all that sad, because by that point they had made their riches. They knew that they were going to survive lockdown and whatever the next year was due to bring, and they lived well and long and happy. And so this festive season, I hope the elves come to your aid, come running through your house and do whatever you need to make it a very merry, happy Christmas, and to bring you good joy, good health and good wealth in 2021. Thank you.
Beautiful. Oh.